In preparing for today, I flashed back to high school physics, and remember, I was a classics major. I took 4 years of Greek and Latin, so you can imagine how good I was in physics class. I remember two things. Number one, the day I broke the Ripple tank, and the day that I learned the only thing I really remember from my high school physics class. It's the idea of the fulcrum. And here is a lever. Here is a fulcrum, and over here is the weight you want to move. And you can put the fulcrum at a place where it takes an extraordinary amount of effort to get a movement, if any at all. But then on the other hand, you can move the fulcrum into a certain area where just a minimal amount of pressure can move an immense weight. And it occurred to me that messaging is the fulcrum. How do you move something huge and movable, like Congress, with the limited amount of time, effort, money, whatever it is that you have? And so messaging can be a fulcrum. Now, let me start by just the way that I was thinking about this. You've got an unusual time. Number one, you are marching on Tuesday when you go meet your members, representatives, staffs, what have you, into the wonderful world of sequester and offset, and just imagine how welcome you all are going to be. Hi, come on in as long as you don't ask anything about money. So, number one. Number two, one of the complications you're going to have is that I have no polite way of saying this. I say this with respect. There are all these competing diseases up there. I mean, like it or not, you're up against Alzheimer's, you're up against heart disease, you're up against this, you're up against stroke, you're up against this. And that is the reality of it. How do you differentiate? How do you position within that morass? You're going to face some people that you've met before and they have this wonderful habit of looking at you, smiling, and I know what you're going to say, so let's just get through it so I can go on to my next meeting, and you're going to have to break through that. And again, there's also groups that are talking about your issues are on your side, and some of what they're saying is exactly what you're saying, and some of what they're saying is not what you're saying. You know, I can almost go back to the healthcare debate each of the several times we've been at it. One of the things that creates that cacophony is that a lot of people are sort of saying the same thing, but they're sort of saying something a little bit different and sort of saying something absolutely contradictory. And that creates a morass, and believe me, morass does not help you. So I just wanted to start by depressing you. To give you a little bit of hope is number one. And look, I understand I may have Democrats here, Republicans here, independents here, so I'm being a sheer analyst here as opposed to any kind of an advocate or any kind of an ideologue. You're reading every day about how the people who want to compete for 16 for the Republican nomination recognize that they are vulnerable with certain groups. And not just ethnic groups, but also with gender groups, and it's yours. And they're going to have to think, well, how can we help soften that? How can we help create more support? Congress has a vulnerability. You know, who's disliked more? I can't think of anyone. And I think that may put them in a position where we got to do something, and we got to do something now, and I can't do everything, so what one or two things can I do that might make things easier for me when I run again in 14? Also, given that Washington, if you now go to the thesaurus, look up Washington, it talks about inertia, nothing gets done. There may be a desire to find something to do. We need something to show compared to the pathetic record we may have now. And every voter is asking that basic question, well, what have you done for me lately? So on the one hand, yeah, it's the worst of times, but as Charles Dickens said, maybe the best of times as well. The problem going into it is the idea of message. And I don't think there's any word out there that is used more and understood less than the idea of message. So I wanted to give you guys a crash course with a particular view towards the visit you can have on Tuesday, but also beyond. Whenever I do the crash course, I use two examples. I don't mean to insult this first individual. And this has to do with dealing with your members of Congress. This has to do with your staffs. This has to do if you're going to be talking to any press, as I presume some of you are going to be doing. So I just want to apologize ahead of time to this individual for using him here, but everything you could possibly do wrong in any one encounter, he's kind enough to do for us here. So we're going to learn from him. So we're going to start with what not to do, so then we can focus very clearly on what it is we do want to do. And I'm going to go here, and we're going to go...
And Katie Couric, live from Studio 1A in Rockefeller Plaza.
Now more of our interview with Senator Bob Dole and his wife Elizabeth. They have just re-released their 1988 autobiography, Unlimited Partners, Our American Story, complete with 3 new chapters on the senator's run for the White House. When we spoke recently, I asked Senator Dole to explain his recent comments that tobacco may not necessarily be addictive.
You know, there is a mixed view among scientists and doctors whether it's addictive or not. I'm not certain whether it's addictive. It is to some people. I know I had a lot of trouble stopping. Some people it's addictive, it's harmful, people shouldn't smoke, children shouldn't smoke. But the hypocrisy of the Democrats who've accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars from tobacco companies since 1992 to come out and take that statement and try to turn it around as somehow Bob Dole was urging young people to smoke.
What you've said about tobacco, about nicotine being not sure about it being addictive, seems to contradict the mounting scientific evidence and even internal documents written by tobacco industry officials
I've seen some of the documents
saying that it is in fact addictive. How do you square that?
I don't, you know, I'm not the one who makes the judgment. And I think we also have to keep in mind, if it's legal, then millions of people have a right to smoke. If it's a drug, if it's addictive and they determine it's a drug, then I suppose the FDA would want to say you no longer use cigarettes. And I think we have to be very careful about granting more power to the Food and Drug Administration. Right now they're very slow on getting new medicines to people who need medicine, who are sick, very slow on devices. Now you're going to turn another thing over to the federal government. Let's let the states do it. The states are requiring ID cards from children. So my answer is, don't smoke, and let's don't double the use of marijuana as we've had in the Clinton administration. The use of marijuana is doubled. I don't see Al Gore or President Clinton talking about that. In fact, they've almost dismantled the national drug policy.
Let's get back to the Democrats and your claim that they've taken hundreds of thousands of dollars. The tobacco industry gave $3 million in political contributions last year. 85% went to GOP candidates. Over the course of your career, you've taken $477,550 from tobacco
Now, I'm not
industry.
sure I've taken, you know, I had a political action committee where I raised money for other candidates. I don't think I don't go to tobacco events. I don't go to any of these things sponsored by tobacco companies.
You've gotten a lot of money from the tobacco industry. Would you concede that?
As far as I know, they're in a legal business now, and I assume that maybe NBC may be sponsored in some part by tobacco companies. They're in a lot of business now, not just tobacco.
I don't think NBC is sponsored by tobacco companies, and there's no television commercials allowed by tobacco industry.
Oh, I know they can, but RJR, for example, is in a lot of things, and so are all the other. They're not just in tobacco.
I guess what I'm trying to say, Senator, is some people think from your comments that you've made of late that you're being an apologist for the tobacco industry.
I think
somehow they have you
only people like
in their
you,
pocket.
only people like you in the media who don't question the Democrats and how much money they've received, and the Democrats. And as the liberal elite always buys the Democratic line, and we go out and advertise it, and they get it all free.
In 1992, President Clinton accepted $6,000.
They've had over $600,000 from the National Committee and other committees controlled by Democrats, and last time I checked, he was a Democrat.
What would you say to people who say he's in tobacco pocket? He's in the pocket of the tobacco industry.
I don't know anybody's in the tobacco pocket.
He's an apologist.
Obviously, when the Republicans control, we get more contributions from companies, as we have since 1994. I haven't any idea whether I've had any money directed to my campaign by tobacco companies. I'm not in their pocket. And my view is, as I've said time and time again, the liberal media crosses that out and goes right back to the Democratic line. I mean, you may be violating the FEC regulations by always, sticking up to the Democrats, advertising their line.
This has been in the news, and it's certainly, we want to give you an opportunity to respond.
You can't respond because the media has already made up their mind. I've said, I don't know whether it's addictive. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. People shouldn't smoke, young or old. Now, what else do you do?
C. Everett Koop is pretty nonpartisan, wouldn't you say?
Oh, he's a dull supporter.
Well, he criticized you quite severely for your comments.
You saw the answer.
Yes, I saw the letter, I did. But I'm saying, you know, you're saying it's a liberal media, but even Dr. Koop had a real problem with your comments.
You know, he watches the liberal media, and he
brainwashed?
Probably a little bit.
I'm not here to nail you in any way.
Okay, we can stop the fight. Now, there is a lot wrong with that conversation. But if we were to try to focus, what is the primary error the good senator is making? Please don't say you showed up. What is the primary error that the good senator is making? And I would say respectfully is the key problem is that he's purely on the defensive. He's spending all of his time rebutting, arguing, counterattacking. How much of any of his time is this is what I'm doing, this is why I'm doing it, this is why it makes sense. Now, I understand your mindset. We're doing God's work. We're doing stuff that is so critically important. You can still be on the defensive in these kinds of meetings you're going to have. I know, but we only have so much money. Do you know how many other people are at the door asking for it? It's going to be easy for you to be on the defensive on this interview. There are lots of ways you can be on the defensive. Another thing is time. Some of you may have the luxury of half-hour meetings. Some of you may get the 5 minutes, hey, how are you, what's your case, gosh, drop by the next time you're in town. How can you communicate a lot of content in a compact amount of time? There is something, and something that the good senator faces here, I call it the dodgeball interview, where they keep trying to focus on one central issue that may not be the same as your central issue. I use another analogy here. There's a tennis game going on, but he's in the backcourt and Katie Couric is at the net. She's asking him the question, directing the conversation here, 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 and he's desperately trying to catch up. There are all these ways, even though you were talking about such important, essential work, that it would be easy for you to be on the defensive. Second thing, it's not quite expressed that well in this interview, but if I've learned anything in this field, is that complexity kills. And complexity kills on two levels. In a live conversation, the hearer doesn't get it, they don't understand it, they come to the wrong conclusion. Worse is what happens after. A lot of you are going to meet with staff. Staff's going to go back to teach to the boss. He or she is going to ask, what did they say? How can they communicate it accurately if they didn't understand it to begin with? A lot of this is like the kids' game telephone. I whisper to you, by the time it gets there, it bears no resemblance to where. So we have to make the message in a way that survives it being passed on, as well as breaking through the clutters that we'll talk about later. Quicksand. There are going to be some aspects of the issue, like the good senator is facing. The more you talk about it, the worse it gets. The more you try to clear it up, the more confusing you make it. For every question you answer, you raise two more questions. Now, I could also show you the clip of Senator Kerry explaining why he voted against it after he voted for it, but it makes me puke, so we're not going to watch that one. And then finally, and this is a contemporary trap that is getting more serious by the day, it's what I call the U trap. You can have a great 20-minute meeting or a great interview with somebody outside. One answer can get you into trouble. One half of one answer can get you into trouble. Sometimes it just takes 3 words. Now, if we had more time, I would show you from my bevy of clips everything from the head of BP. Remember when he said, you know, I'd like my life back? I'd like my life back. And lost him his job. Created a lot of getting away from the message he may have been trying to communicate. I can give you lots of examples where just one little slip can really obliterate everything else that's said. And the worst things, to be very honest with you, because I work with group efforts like this, it just takes one of you. It just takes one of you saying perhaps an uncalculated and it's always you didn't mean it that way. It just takes one little comment, one little place, and all of you then go back to trap number 1 on the defensive. Well, there's a way I think you have to prepare for this stuff, and I think there's a way you have to execute it. So let me show you an indication of how I'm going to suggest you take your information and structure into a message. Now, in order for this to be valid, it's got to be comparable. Well, I think I've got something comparable. I have another government official on today's show interviewing with Matt Lauer instead of Katie Couric, but in its own way, it's just as tough, just as vigorous, potentially just as dangerous. I think there's a different result. You will watch it. Is there a different result? If so, is it any good? If so, how is it achieved? And the most important point, how can you use it? Which is what I will then spend the rest of our time chatting about. But let's learn from this. By the way, be kind. No comment about Matt's hair. That is, he had it at the time.
Thank you. With all the talk of Social Security funds running out and 401ks playing a great role in our lives, there will be a meeting later today to discuss retirement savings. a summit that was organized by the Secretary of Labor, Alexis Herman. Madam Secretary, good morning to you.
Good morning.
The numbers are a little discouraging here. If you look at the gross national products of several countries, in relation to that number, Americans save for retirement only about a fifth as much as the Japanese, only about a third as much as the Italians. Why do you think that is?
I think it's because we don't realize the importance of savings for our own futures in order to have the quality of lifestyles that we need to have as we grow older. You know, we think we can do it after we get the next kid out of college or that down payment together for a house. And we have to know that it's never too early, it's never too late, and that every penny counts, and we have to start now.
People are going to need about 60 to 80% of their pre-retirement income to maintain their standard of living after retirement. Where does that chunk come from? That's a lot of money.
That's why we have to stress, in addition to the solvency of Social Security, which the President is committed to, that we have to have personal savings as well as private pensions. You know, retirement security really equals a three-legged stool. It's Social Security, it's personal savings, and it's private pensions.
But when you talk about Social Security and you say the President's committed to its solvency, what do you say to people who say, you know what, I've been contributing to this system for years, I've done my part, I'll make my personal savings, and that program, Social Security, might not be there for me?
We're committed to ensuring that it is going to be there. But what we must know is that even today, you know, Social Security will represent only 40% of what you need in terms of personal income for your retirement years. So we still have a gap of somewhere, as you've already indicated, of 60 to 80% that's going to be needed.
But when you say Social Security will be there, are you saying it will be there if American workers work to the age of 70 now as opposed to 65?
I think as we look at what we're doing overall policy-wise with the age limits on requirements, that's something, as you know, that we're presently discussing. What we're committed to is ensuring that the solvency of Social Security is going to be there. And I think whether or not we're talking about age 65 or age 70, that's what we're committed to.
Madam Secretary, let me switch to another subject. As you well know, you face an independent counsel investigation into allegations that you peddled influence and broke campaign finance laws. How effective can you be as the Labor Secretary while you face the specter of that investigation?
You know, unfortunately, this is something that goes with the territory in Washington these days. The Justice Department found no evidence of wrongdoing on my part. And so what I'm doing is cooperating fully still, but I'm really concentrating on trying to be the best Labor Secretary that I can be.
You said the Justice Department found no evidence of wrongdoing. They did find some corroborating evidence of some of the stories told, especially by an African businessman. His name is Laurent Yane. How well do you know that man?
I think what's important to point out there is that they said they found no evidence of wrongdoing on my part, and certainly nothing that indicated anything that he had said with evidence to anything that I've done.
How well do you know him, though?
I don't really know him that well, and I think the point for me is that I'm not spending a lot of energy on these kinds of questions. What I want to concentrate on is the business of the American people. I'm confident about the future, and I want to make sure that Americans are going to be equally confident about their future, and that's why, for me, issues like this Savor Summit, that's what really matters.
But, Madam Secretary, you must wonder why this man would make these allegations.
You know, I don't put any energy into that, because if you spend your time worrying about those kinds of questions, then you really can't concentrate on what's really important. And so I don't get confused on what's important and what really matters today. And that's continuing to do the business on behalf of American workers.
Labor Secretary Alexis Herman. Madam Secretary, thanks very much.
Thank you for inviting me to be with you.
You're more than welcome.
Now let's focus on that on two levels. First, to be fair, let us hold her accountable to what I held the good senator accountable. Is she defensive? I don't think so. Complex? I got it. Quicksand? I don't think she got stuck in anything. And I don't think there's anything you would remember in a negative way. So I would at least say she survives these traps. But there's a much more important way you got to look at this. So let's say I run into you in the hallway the day this is broadcast, and I ask you, did you see it? See the Labor Secretary, I wanted to see it, but I had to take one of the kids to school. Did you see it? You say, yes, I did. And I ask you the following question. What did she say? What would you tell me? Say she wants to keep Social Security solvent. What does she want you to do? Starting when? How? Okay, three-legged stool, and while you do that, Social Security, we're going to keep solvent. As my grandmother used to say, you should do so well. People ask me, what's a good interview? What's a good pitch? What's a good hearing? What's a good press conference? What's a good meeting with my senator? What's a good meeting with the senator's staff? Those end up being slightly different answers. They all start at the same place. And actually, it's a two-part, but they're consecutive. First and foremost, do people hear and remember what you want them to hear and remember? Secondly, and I have to do this visually, guys, so watch me for just a second, does it make them do this? You know, you can continue to talk. It may not be, you know, you can continue to talk as opposed to get out of here. Because if you break through with something that that makes me ask you to leave, I'm not sure that helps. From that perspective, that was successful communication. You remembered what she wanted you to remember. How do I know her prepped the night before? And that's what she went in there with. This is not what she came in my office with. They all came in my office, as they all do. And this has to do with all my corporate clients, all my trade associations, all my public interest groups, with the 3-ring binders, like those. Here's the stuff. Now, you got to know your stuff. I can't help if you don't know your stuff. Problem is, I usually don't work with groups like that. I'm usually asked to work with groups who know too much and want to say too much. And there's a point where that becomes counterproductive. And that is the point where you are at. What you have to do is shape it into a message. Now, I use that word message. People go, message? We got plenty of messages. Look at all of our messages. That's not a that's not a message anymore. That's a mess. So many years ago, I developed 2 tools that we're sort of famous for. Message triangles and message boxes. That's it. No pentagons, no octagons, no tetragons, no googlegons. It's taking your issue, creating a minimum of 3 triangle, maximum of 4 box, broad points, not little tiny skinny stuff. This is important stuff. It's got to be substantive. It's got to be relevant to the listener, and I am going to challenge you all on that. So the idea of salience, and then put into this combination kind of creates an entire persuasive case. You don't want much else, you don't need much else. So let me be clear, it's not having 3 or 4 things to say. You can have 3 or 4 things to say and get killed. You can have 34 things to say, and I know you'll get killed. It's this combination that makes it fly. I'm going to zip you through this very quickly because I want to get to your stuff as soon as possible. Day Alexis took her oath of office. She said, I'm looking out for the welfare of the American worker. Fine, I put that in the middle. What I put in the middle of one of these constructs is one of 2 things. Sometimes this is an action. Do this, buy this, vote for this, support this, where you're probably going to be on Tuesday. Sometimes it's simply positioning. This is positioning. But we took everything else you wanted to say and needed to say, and we threw out stuff. We threw out the complex, the defensive, the quicksandy stuff, and the stuff that could be misinterpreted. And here's how we ratcheted. It's important to start saving now. Retirement security is best to look at as 3-legged stool. And the administration is committed to the solvency of Social Security. And notice that every question, with the exception of the last third of the interview, which I'm going to get to in just a moment, she came back to one or combination of those 3 points, which is why you were able to leave that interview remembering 2 or 3 points, because we focused. You know, can't put a size 10 foot in a size 3 shoe, and all that's there is the size 3 shoes. Now, this is not about ducking questions. This is about not getting stuck in questions. You have to address questions. Matter of fact, I tell my clients 2 things. If it sounds like you're on message, it's bad. And if you don't address questions, it's bad. But we don't want to address questions the way Bob Dole did and get stuck in it. So what is remembered is something really extraneous or tangential to what it is that you need to communicate. So we develop on the bottom on those arrows what I like to call deflators. Not deflectors, deflators. How can I deflate the charge, deflate the attack, deflate the criticism, so I can get out of it and back to what it is I want to make sure people get. What goes into these deflators? Brief, 2 or 3 sentences. Not 2 or 3 words, that's not enough, and not 2 or 3 pages, that's quicksand. And the strategic intent is to calm it down, not stir it up, contain it, not broaden it, and then if you choose, you can go back to message. So independent counsels, unfortunately, Matt, they come with the territory in Washington, D.C. these days. I'll continue to cooperate, but we got to get Americans to start saving more now. Why would this guy lie about you? A, Department of Justice found no evidence of wrongdoing on my part, Matt. I'll continue to cooperate, but we better make sure Social Security is there and solvent. Sometimes people confuse the 2. I want people to remember my triangle. Those deflators, just there so I don't, get stuck in quicksand and don't duck stuff. But that's not what I want them to remember. I want them to remember what's above. Why do you need something like this? Because of 4 very clear principles. Number 1, so much information out there, what you say can and will get lost. Now let's just take 3 groups you're dealing with. People, legislators, and the press. People, they're overwhelmed by information. They're saturated by information. No one is going to ask, please tell me the 93 things I need to know about your issue. They're not going to do it. And if you give them, you overwhelm them. They sort of avoid it. Too much. Or your big problem, they remember selectively. They remember your 47th and 68th point, not the key stuff. Or like teenagers across America, they hear it, they remember it for about 20 seconds, and then they forget it. The reason we do this is not because you don't have enough to say, it's because you have too much to say. Now, I know what you're thinking, but this is important. Yes, it is. It doesn't matter. Seriously, several years ago, I'd have taken you by the arm and said, please come outside with me. Pick someone who looks like they know, like they read the newspaper every day. You would have pointed at that person. We would have approached them and asked the person the following question. What do you think of the pending invasion of Iraq? And they would have told you the following. Well, Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction, and he's used them before in the past because he's an evil dictator, but maybe we should give the inspectors more time, or let's get some more allies involved in this, and I don't know, what else? I just gave you both sides of an issue being covered 24/7/31 in a box. And if that's all they remember from that, what are you remembering about yours? And you're going on the Hill where they're dealing with how many subcommittees, how many full committees, how many different issues? So let's talk about legislators and regulators. My wife worked one for 15 years. He was overloaded with information. Usually the briefing she got as they walked from the office to the floor of the Senate. Not a whole lot of time. Groups like yours would come in and drop the 3-ring binder. And by the way, it has to be big, it has to be thick, because when it hits the table, it has to make a loud noise. But the only thing she could guarantee that the senator would ever see would be that executive summary on the first page. What's on the first page? And I've never seen the issue that didn't get ratcheted down to 2 or 3 points anyway. Give me any of today's issues, from Obamacare to anything, 2 or 3 things they hit each other over the head with. What do you want your 2 or 3 points to be? Easiest one in the world to explain is the media itself. Average print article these days is about 650 words, and you're not the only one they talk to. How much can you get in there? I sometimes think the triangle is over-optimistic. This is about ratcheting down, because if not, nothing gets through, or the stuff you don't want to get through gets through. This next clip I'm going to show you is probably the single most important clip I'm going to show you all day. It's the principle of salience. Every person in every audience has himself, herself, itself, themselves the same basic question. What's this stuff mean to me? Not what's in it for me. People look at issues from their own point of view, their perspective, through their filters. Their filters may not be the same as yours. What I am talking about is not lying. What I am talking about is not propaganda. It is realizing the following facts. There's hundreds of things you could be saying. They are not all equally persuasive to the listener. And this is my sincerest, don't get mad at me. You all are doing this because you feel very deeply about something. And there may be 2 or 3 reasons why you feel that way. But if they don't move the listener the same way, what's the point? And sometimes you got to focus on what are the arguments, not that you find persuasive, but the listener will find persuasive. And it's harder than that. You're talking to multiple audiences. You're talking to individuals, you're talking to funders, you're talking to members of Congress, you're talking to staffers. You got to reach all of them at the same time. Forget this idea of message targeting. Because of the internet, everyone sees what you say to everyone. This forces you towards messaging that is equally effective to every single audience you're talking at the same time. Is this possible? Well, we're going to try to show you an example of it. You all know what focus groups are, right? You all know what polling is. How many of you have ever seen a dial group? All right, well, I'm going to show you. Actually, you have. If you have watched any of the presidential debates, you saw them. I'm going to show you a little story from the Today Show. It's edited. It's not going to take long. It starts by 30 seconds them introducing the methodology, so you can see audiences reacting to a message. And then we're going to take 3 audiences in a very low-key issue that no one disagrees on, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And we're going to look at 3 audiences, pro-Israeli, pro-Palestinian, and neutral. Is there anything that can make all 3 audiences agree? This is a very interesting journey you're going to go on. Let us watch. The volume's a little loud. You may need to adjust it.
We hired ASI Entertainment, a national advertising and entertainment research company, to recruit an audience of an equal number of people who identify themselves as either pro-Palestinian or pro-Israeli, and some who said they felt largely neutral. Using the most advanced instantaneous response measurement system available, the audience can watch as each side makes an argument while we measure their reaction. The group we've assembled literally tells us what they're thinking. The blue line of the graph identifies the reaction of the pro-Israeli group. The green line is the reaction of the pro-Palestinian group, and the yellow is the neutral group. When a line goes toward the top of the screen, that's a positive reaction. A line toward the bottom of the screen is a negative reaction. The steeper the line, the more extreme the reaction.
So obviously you want all three lines going in the same direction, preferably upwards. But watch what happens here.
Has functioned in a way not to
this
calm,
is the Palestinian
but
line.
rather to aggravate.
This
Even
is the
when
Israeli
there were
line.
periods of
this
calm,
is the neutral line.
Sharon would then turn
They
to assassinating a couple of Palestinian leaders.
They couldn't agree less.
That it would
and this
create
group
a
is
backlash.
brain dead.
So that this gradually spiraled out of control.
The gentleman is speaking in a way that is salient, relevant, persuasive to only one-third of his audience.
To see lost
alienating
by the
the other
authority,
and not engaging
so that they could
the third.
ultimately justify
Well, let's watch
this
what happens
kind of
in this
aggression.
next response.
A third party needs to enter into the situation to separate the two.
And watch
there
closely,
needs to be
something
a
subtle is
dramatic
gonna happen.
transformation on the ground.
And
It
this
can't
stays
just be
high.
Band-aids on buildings. Palestinians need to feel hope. And that can only come both in the form of political hope, when they feel that they'll get their state and the Israelis will be off their backs and out of their lives. And secondly, they need to have economic hope. They need to know that they're going to get a job, that they're going to have a future, that they're going to have a real...
And notice by the end, the pro-Israeli line is actually slightly higher than the neutral line. Now, that little dip there, not the big one when he was a little snarky, was when he said Palestinians need to feel hope. The Israeli line dips, the neutral line jumps up. Why? Well, at that point, the Israeli audience is saying, hope? Hope for what? Take down the settlements? Make us leave the West? What? Neutral group hears hope. Hope is good. Everyone needs hope. Hope is what keeps us going in the morning. It's only until after they figure out the Israeli group hears what they mean by hope. Oh, get a job? Fine by me. Get them off my street. And notice what happens. And my point is, respectfully, you may be talking to yourselves. And you've got to open up the blinders and be talking to everybody. I'm going to zip you through the last two principles, show you one case study, and then I'm going to make a suggestion just to get you started. But let me go to here. Number 3, you got to keep the messaging simple, not simplistic, but simple. What I showed you from Alexis, that wasn't simplistic, that was simple. Why do you have to keep your messaging? 2 reasons. Very important. First, complex message do not fit through cluttered media environments. Big square pegs, little round holes. You better do the focusing and the simplification so others don't do it for you. And now the big reason why you need to make it simple. You need to keep it simple for your sakes. And it's not because you guys are dumb. Look around and see how many the hell of you there are here today. And if you tell your member it's ABC, you tell your member it's DEF, you tell your member it's GHI, you're all accurate, it's in the 3-ring binder. You just help create the clutter. The reason you need to do this is so maybe ABC, BAC, CBA, it can sound like you belong to the same organization and you agree with each other. This is about breaking through the cacophony of noise downtown that you are going to face. And if I can make a sheerly political point, I work in some of their offices every once in a while. If you are doing ABC and you're doing JKL, it is obvious this group does not have its act together. I don't have to take them as seriously as this group that's ABC, BAC, CBA, AC. God, it sounds like they all got their act together. This is also sort of that warning sign, we know what we're doing, and we know how to make you pay if you don't help us. The final point, and I do have a little clip, it's also so they can hear it more than once. Let me show you a little clip. It only takes a minute from Nightline about 2 years ago. And we're going to go to armed forces in Iraq. And I'm simply going to ask, are you guys capable of this yet?
We still have a ways to go, but what we're really trying to achieve here is sustainable security on Iraqi terms. Let's look at the conditions. Instead of being a time-based approach to any decision to withdraw, it's got to be conditions-based.
I think it's dangerous to pull out if it's not conditions-based.
I think it's very dangerous. We have a mission, and it's not until the mission's done that I can look my leader in the eye and say, sir, ma'am, mission accomplished.
It is that phrase, sustainable security, that we heard again and again in Iraq.
from officers on the streets of Baghdad.
That would be conditions-based. So we think in terms of accomplishing the mission.
I mean, you can't put a timetable on it.
To senior officers.
What I'm focused on right now is helping the Iraqi people and the Iraqi government achieve sustainable security.
So I wonder what they're doing over there. And my simple question, are you guys capable of something like that yet? Let me start to get towards my conclusion with two last points. Number one, I've been doing this since 1981, and I tried to thought it was the single most relevant example I could use with you guys today, and it's this. Back in 1993 in NAFTA, which was one of the first big initiatives the Clinton administration took on. It was opposed by the AFL-CIO, Pat Buchanan and his followers, Pat Robertson and the religious right, H. Ross Perot, who had run in '92 and got almost 20, did pretty well, his followers, and Ralph Nader and all the public interest research groups and the environmental community. 6 rather formidable opponents, and yet we prevailed for 2 reasons. One, we did have a message. Passed NAFTA because it would create the single largest free trade zone in the world to the tune of $6.5 trillion, 360 million people. It'll be a job creator because if you bring down the tariffs, you'll increase the exports and will increase the number of jobs manufactured in those cities. And in a 21st century global economy, we have to compete, not retreat. Compete against all the other trading zones out there. And then our deflator, yeah, we may have some problems with Mexico, but they'll be easier to address with versus without NAFTA. And I kept looking back after we were victorious, not hugely, but enough to get it passed, and I wondered, why is that? Because each of those 6 groups that I talked about before, they all argued against it in their own way. We argued about it from one point of view. I will always assert that a mediocre message that everyone sticks to is more powerful than 5 people with 4 messages, even though 2 or 3 of them may be brilliant. There is something about economies of scale that certainly apply here. And again, for all the other reasons, do you guys have your act together, whatever, when you leave, can I turn to my senator, my House person, and say, here's what they said. Now, I did something, and this is what I will end with, extremely presumptuous. I read your stuff and I put together a triangle. I have no idea if it's accurate. I have no idea if it's what you want to say, but I at least want to get you started. By the way, I say this respectfully. Y'all think people have heard your message. They haven't, okay? I was reading about it when I got the stuff from you guys about a month ago. I started hearing of you guys for the first time. Now, look, I work, no, don't yell at me, okay? I do some work for the American Cancer Society every once in a while. So you would presume I'd at least heard of you. No, it's not. Now, maybe my bad, but also maybe because everyone is out there sort of saying stuff that's sort of the same way, nothing's breaking through. I was very struck by the nerviness of some of your messaging. I actually think right now that's pretty good. So if I had to leave you with just sort of something to start to think about, this is what I would be doing. Oh, don't worry, I will leave a copy of this with you guys. Don't worry about leaving it, I'll make you a copy. I keep thinking of that 2020 date, and and sometimes I do like stuff that can fit on a bumper sticker on it. Look, 2020 is date certain. That's the date when we will then have a plan, whatever. I just like 2020 is our date certain. I like the nerviness of your stuff. I have known of no other area in health where we have spent so much and accomplished so little. And I think you have to sort of rub their noses in it. Look at how much time, how much money, how much pain, how much death, how much suffering, and this is all we have to show for it? What the hell have you people been doing? Then, in order to broaden it, because even though no member of my family may have breast cancer or suffered from breast cancer, it still does affect me. It affects everyone every day because of the impact it may have on others, the impact on the economy, the impact it has on the cost of health care. It affects everyone. And it doesn't take, what's that game, 6 degrees of separation? It's just 2 degrees of separation at the most. And then, knowing what he was going to talk about, maybe the innovation system is going to be the only silver bullet. If we put together a system that makes stuff work, that's going to be the magic drug. That's going to be the silver bullet. I don't care what I shouldn't say that. Of course I care what it is. I don't care what the final version of it is, as long as Tuesday morning you're all heading down there with the same one. And so maybe you can take a little time later, or tomorrow, and what's the triangle? Just like we had it for NAFTA, single largest free trade zone in the world, compete, not retreat, and 21st century global economy, this will let us compete and be successful. And speaking of successful, I hope you are on Tuesday.